Come here, kid. Show me how someone like you plays chess in the projects. The sneer in Ms. Genevieve Langston's voice sliced through the air like a whip. Her words echoed across the polished floors of her Manhattan penthouse, soaked with the kind of haughty disdain only old money could afford. She didn't even look up from her glass of aged Bordeaux as she summoned the boy. Malik Thompson, just 16, was quietly helping his mother Rosa serve appetizers at a high society fundraiser when Genevieve singled him out, turning a moment meant to be charitable into a personal sideshow. The room, filled with senators, venture capitalists, and their perfectly bored spouses, paused briefly. Some chuckled behind crystal flutes of imported champagne. Others exchanged amused glances. Genevieve had planned this gala to support disadvantaged urban youth. The irony that one of them now carried silver trays through her penthouse seemed to delight her. "I am sure he knows how to move a pawn," she added mockingly, gesturing toward the ornate Brazilian rosewood chessboard resting on the designer coffee table. "Let's see what the boy can do against someone who's actually studied the game." One guest, Mr. Pendleton, a media mogul, leaned toward his wife and whispered, "Does he even know bishops go diagonally?" Laughter bubbled up again, rolling across the room like a smug, invisible tide. Rosa lowered her gaze, lips pressed into a thin line. Her knuckles whitened around the tray in her hand. 16 years scrubbing floors, ironing linens, saving every dime to raise her son alone, and now she had to witness her employer use Malik as a party trick. She had known Genevieve for decades, since they were both barely women, but while Rosa had aged in silence and sacrifice, Genevieve had only grown more refined in her cruelty. "Rosa, darling," Genevieve said with syrupy sweetness, "you can stop working for now. I want you to watch your son play. It'll be enlightening for both of you." Malik stood frozen for a second. His deep brown eyes scanned the room, not just the chessboard, but every smirking face and clinking glass. He'd learned early that silence, used right, could speak volumes. And right now his quiet gaze made a few chuckles falter. There was something unusual in his stillness, a quiet confidence, a sense of something about to unfold, like the moments just before a storm splits the sky. His fingers twitched slightly, as if moving invisible pieces across an imaginary board. "Of course, Miss Langston," Malik finally said, his voice composed, smooth as velvet. Some guests glanced at one another, intrigued. It would be an honor. Genevieve smiled victoriously, reclining in her chair like a queen, about to enjoy a particularly entertaining duel. "Marvelous. I bet you've never seen a chess set like this, Custom carved pieces, inlaid with jade, worth more than... well, never mind." From across the room, Councilwoman Elaine Rivera, seated by the window, raised an eyebrow. "Genevieve, are you sure this isn't a bit much? The poor boy's going to be humiliated." "Don't be ridiculous," Genevieve waved her off, adjusting her diamond necklace. "It's a valuable learning moment. He'll go back home with a story to tell. He played chess in a real penthouse." But what Genevieve Langston didn't know, and was about to learn in the most unexpected way, was that this boy from the Bronx had spent the last 7 years immersing himself in chess with monastic discipline. While other kids in his neighborhood played on rusted basketball courts or got swept into trouble, Malik consumed every chess book he could borrow from the local library. On late nights, when his mother worked double shifts, Malik watched classic matches on the flickering screen of a second-hand laptop he'd fixed himself. He had studied Kasparov, Polgar, and Magnus Carlsen, memorizing over 250 opening variations and defensive patterns. He could recite all the top 50 legendary defenses in chess without missing a beat. But what mattered most wasn't just Malik's memory or skill. It was the fact that Ms. Genevieve Langston had made the mistake of judging him, harshly and unfairly, based purely on where he came from. And now, in front of her powerful, silver spoon circle, she was about to pay the price. And it wouldn't just be a defeat on a board of wood and marble. It would be the kind of loss that sears itself into the memory, one that rewrites pride with humility and ego with shame. As Genevieve delicately arranged the ivory pieces with dramatic flair, Malik scanned the room, taking in every guest with sharp, thoughtful eyes. His calm wasn't just the stillness before a match, it was the silence before a reckoning. He wasn't preparing for a game. He was preparing to tear down every illusion of superiority that hovered in that room. if you've ever experienced or witnessed the sting of prejudice. If you've ever had someone look at you like you didn't belong, don't forget to subscribe. Because what unfolded next wasn't just a battle between queen and pawn. It was a reminder that appearances deceive and that the greatest minds often bloom in the most unexpected places. Genevieve took the white side of the board, her movements oozing with the certainty of someone who had never truly lost anything that mattered. "I always play white, dear," she said casually. "It's a tradition in my family." She didn't even acknowledge that in official chess, colors are assigned by lot, not privilege. Malik simply nodded, arranging his black pieces with such fluid precision that Mr. Pendleton, seated nearby, raised an eyebrow. Each piece landed dead center in its square, so neatly, so perfectly, as if this board, so revered by the wealthy, was nothing more than his daily training ground. "Let's make this fun," Genevieve announced, casting her voice like a net across the room. "If the boy can even make me sweat once, I'll donate, let's say, $1,000 to some public school." Scattered laughter followed, but this time Malik looked up and smiled, not a warm smile, not a thankful smile, a smile his mother Rosa knew too well. She felt a chill run along her spine. That was the smile, the same one he wore in 3rd grade when the principal said he couldn't possibly have scored that high on a state math test. The same one he had the day he told her, at just 11, "Mom, I don't need help with numbers anymore." Genevieve made her first move, E4, a standard pawn push. "King's pawn," she chirped. "Classic Harvard opening, dear." She said it like she was teaching a toddler to hold a spoon. Without hesitation, Malik replied, "C5, the Sicilian defense." A hush fell over the room. That move wasn't random. It wasn't a lucky guess. It was theory, high-level theory. "Now that's interesting," murmured Councilwoman Rivera, leaning in, intrigued. Genevieve blinked. 3 full seconds. That was all Malik needed to see it. She had memorized a few openings, but didn't understand the deeper currents of the game. She replied with NF3, another memorized play, likely picked up at a Sunday brunch chess club. As Genevieve pondered her next step, Malik's mind drifted, just briefly, back 8 years. He was 9 then. One afternoon, he had pulled a torn chess book from the trash bin behind the public library. Slipping it into his backpack like treasure, he came home and asked his mother, "Can you teach me this?" Rosa, exhausted after a 14-hour shift, had raised an eyebrow. "Mijo, why chess?" "To be like the rich kids," he had said. "They always act like they're smarter." Back then, Rosa earned less than $700 a month. No tutors, no chess sets, no internet. But there was the library, dusty, dim, and free. Every day after school, Malik would walk nearly 2 miles to pore over old books, studying annotated games that no one else had touched in years. Back in the penthouse, Genevieve finally moved a pawn to D3, a cautious, timid choice that reflected more than just her chess habits. In life, too, she preferred safety, controlled spaces, inherited privilege. Malik answered with NC6, developing with swift, calculated rhythm. Every move took less than 5 seconds, like his fingers were simply following a script carved deep into his brain. He didn't need to think. He had already thought this through years ago. "Our little guest is moving a bit too fast, don't you think?" Genevieve quipped to the room. "In real chess, you think before you move." And that's when Malik played his first subtle trap, not on the board, but in the mind. He paused. Deliberately, he tapped his chin, furrowed his brow. He let 15 seconds pass, like a performer preparing for a dramatic scene. Then, G6, preparing the fianchetto for his bishop. A move not just about positioning, but a quiet warning. "I see you, and I know how to win." To any casual observer, Malik's last move might have looked like a typical beginner's blunder. Impulsive, careless even. But in reality, it was a carefully calculated piece of a strategy that had been in motion since his very first move. A trap so subtly constructed, it would take another 10 turns for its brilliance to fully reveal itself. "Aha!" Genevieve exclaimed, spinning toward her guests with smug satisfaction. "See, he can't even stay focused. No patience. Typical." But not everyone in the room shared her confidence. Mr. Pendleton, who had once played competitive chess during his college years at Yale nearly 4 decades ago, leaned forward sharply. His brow furrowed, eyes narrowing on the board. "Genevieve," he murmured cautiously, "this boy is building a fast dragon variation." "A what?" she snapped. clearly annoyed at having her moment of triumph interrupted. It's a high-level line in the Sicilian defense. Aggressive, sharp, very advanced. Genevieve scoffed, glancing at the board, her fingers suddenly a little stiffer than before. Nonsense. He probably saw it in some Netflix movie. But with each passing move, a strange and unsettling truth began to take form. Malik wasn't reacting to her game. He was controlling it. Every piece he developed landed in a square with purpose, balance, and elegance. It was more than gameplay. It was choreography. A silent symphony unfolding across the polished rosewood board, a rhythm only he could hear, like watching poetry in motion, written in rooks and pawns. In the corner of the room, Rosa stood still, her tray clutched to her chest, heart pounding against her ribs like a drum. She had always known her son was gifted, but never had she seen him face off against someone who so openly disrespected his very existence. And never had she seen fear creep across Genevieve Langston's face like this. Yes, fear, not of losing a game, but of realizing for the first time that maybe the social status she clung to like a silk scarf meant nothing in the face of actual brilliance. Each new condescending remark, each smug glance, only poured fuel on a quiet fire inside Malik, one built over years of being overlooked, dismissed, underestimated. They didn't know that every snide comment was, in essence, a signature on their own downfall, written in bold strokes across the 64 squares of that battlefield. Then came Malik's 10th move, a subtle pawn sacrifice. It seemed innocent, almost random, until Mr. Pendleton choked on his drink, coughing into his handkerchief. His eyes widened. That's a trap, he whispered under his breath, his voice cracking. A beautiful one. He leaned toward Genevieve, trying once more to warn her. Genevieve, this kid, he's no amateur. But Genevieve waved him off with a flick of her manicured hand. Relax, darling. He probably memorized a few tricks off the internet. I'll finish this in 5 minutes. And just then, Malik stood up, calmly, without urgency. He walked over to his mother, who stood trembling in the shadows of that opulent room. He leaned close and spoke softly, but his voice carried a quiet thunder across the awkward hush. Mom, remember when you told me that one day I'd show them who we really are? Rosa blinked, her eyes instantly wet. Of course she remembered. It was his 15th birthday. No cake, no gifts, just 2 bowls of rice and a silent kitchen. She'd been crying, thinking he wouldn't notice. But Malik had noticed, and he'd promised her, quietly, with a steadiness far beyond his age, that he'd change everything. From across the room, Congresswoman Rivera turned to her husband and whispered, "That boy has more dignity in his pinky than half this room combined." Genevieve, tapping her manicured fingers on the table, looked visibly irritated. "Can we continue? I have other appointments today." Malik returned to his seat, but something had shifted. The shy teen who had taken that chair minutes ago was gone. Now, in his place, sat a young man forged by struggle, guided by discipline, and armed with a mind trained not just to play, but to outthink. Move 11. Executed with the confidence of a surgeon, he created a double threat, a tactical dagger. Genevieve paled. If she protected her king, she'd lose her queen. If she saved the queen, checkmate loomed just 3 moves away. That's not possible, she muttered, her eyes darting across the board like they were trying to escape the truth. Mr. Pendleton leaned forward, shaking his head slowly. Genevieve, he's outplaying you. And I doubt he's ever stepped foot in a formal chess club. Genevieve didn't answer, because at that moment, she was drowning in the realization that the very boy she'd tried to make a joke out of was rewriting the rules, not just of the game, but of the entire evening. Malik sat still, and as she stared helplessly at the board, he took a quiet moment to scan the room. Faces that had once sneered were now tense. Even Rivera had stopped sipping her champagne. And yet, the most powerful move of the night was still to come. Even the most distracted guests had begun to lean in. Mr. Pendleton, the hotel tycoon, had silently put away his phone. Even his wife, who had been flipping absent-mindedly through a luxury lifestyle magazine, was now sitting upright, her eyes glued to the board. And Rosa knew that look on her son's face. It was the exact same expression she had seen years ago, when Malik was just 12 years old and had stumbled upon the dusty chess section at the local public library. That intense, focused stare, the stillness like a statue holding back a flood of thoughts. She had watched him sit for 5 straight hours at that library desk, eyes locked on diagrams of historical games, while other kids played basketball outside. It was the same look he had every morning at 5 a.m., hunched over a cracked laptop, solving tactic problems in the freezing kitchen before heading off to school. And now, here he was. Genevieve finally moved. A nervous play, a retreat, an escape attempt. But it was far too late. Malik had foreseen that possibility 6 moves ago. He gently moved his queen across the board and said one simple word. Check. There was no sound in the room, not even a breath. The silence hit like a sudden blackout, total and electrified. Genevieve stared at the board, then at Malik, then back at the board again. Her fingers twitched. Not from fear, but from a deep, barely restrained fury. The kind of rage that comes when you realize you're being slowly dismantled, piece by piece, by someone you once considered beneath you. You must have memorized that sequence from somewhere, she blurted, her voice rising, strained. Nobody just learns that on their own. For the first time since the match began, Malik smiled. A small, quiet smile. Not smug, but confident. Controlled. You're right, ma'am, he said calmly. I learned it from Garry Kasparov. What? Pendleton blinked. Kasparov taught you? Not personally, Malik said as he nudged his rook into place, the final setup. But I studied all his recorded games. 1,083 of them, to be exact. This exact sequence was used in the 1984 World Championship, Game 23, against Karpov. Genevieve's mouth fell slightly open. She looked around, hoping someone, anyone, would come to her defense. But the only thing she found was silence. And for the first time in her carefully controlled world, the silence wasn't admiring. It was judging. And it wasn't judging Malik. Rosa stepped forward. Her voice, when it came, was soft, but solid as stone. My son woke up every day before dawn to study. No internet. We couldn't afford it. He walked 10 kilometers to the library every day after school. When our power was cut, he studied by candlelight while I worked night shifts to keep us fed. The room fell so quiet, you could hear the soft hum of the chandelier overhead. A few guests looked away, ashamed. Malik glanced at his mother, his eyes filled with the kind of love that doesn't need words. That connection, mother and son, carried more dignity than any designer gown or champagne toast in that room. He turned back to the board. Checkmate, he said. He placed his queen down gently. Genevieve sat still, frozen, staring, as if she expected the pieces to move back on their own, as if maybe, by staring hard enough, she could undo it all, erase the outcome. But the truth sat there, cold and unmoving. The king was trapped, and so was she. When she finally looked up, Malik was watching her with the same calm he had shown from the beginning. But now, everything had changed. The energy in the room, the way the guests looked at him, not as the help, not as the entertainment, but as something else entirely. As a force, as a mind that didn't just play the game, but understood it better than any of them. And Genevieve, they looked at her differently now too, but not with admiration, with something far more devastating, disappointment. What Genevieve Langston didn't yet realize was that this loss, this humbling, was just the opening move of a much bigger shift. A game had begun that would rewrite everything she thought she knew about class, intelligence, and legacy. Malik had just proved something she'd never wanted to admit. That true nobility has nothing to do with titles or trust funds, but everything to do with discipline, resilience, and character. She stared at the board for a full 15 seconds, her fingers brushing against the fallen king like they might wake him up. The only sound in the room now? The ticking of the $20,000 vintage wall clock on the mantel. That was just luck, she mumbled, her voice thin and unsteady. He must have memorized that sequence. Mr. Pendleton rose slowly from his chair, walked over to the board, and studied the layout in silence. Then he turned to her and said softly, Genevieve, that boy just pulled off a variation of the Sicilian defense that even I didn't recognize. I've been playing chess for 4 decades, Mr. Pendleton muttered, almost to himself, still stunned by what he had just witnessed. Across the room, Congresswoman Rivera quietly pulled out her phone and began recording, her instincts kicking in like a seasoned politician who could smell a moment that would set the internet ablaze. A wealthy socialite, undone in her own home by a teenage prodigy she had tried to mock. That wasn't just a personal humiliation, it was a viral moment in the making. I don't accept this, Genevieve suddenly barked, springing to her feet. In her rush, she knocked over a bishop and 2 pawns, sending them clinking onto the floor. Her voice trembled, not from fear, but from an emotional storm of embarrassment and disbelief. "Something's wrong here," she said sharply, eyes darting across the faces in the room. "No one learns like that on their own. Someone trained him. Someone set this up to humiliate me." But Malik stayed seated, calm, unshaken. He looked up at her with that same composed expression he had worn from the first move to the last. "If you'd like a rematch," he said softly, "I'd be happy to play again. I can even take on anyone else in the room. Or all of you, if you prefer." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, half disbelief, half awe. Some chuckled nervously, others just stared. Was it arrogance? Or had he earned the right to say it? "Now you're just being insolent," Genevieve snapped, her face burning with rage. "Boys like you don't speak to their superiors that way." That's when Rosa stepped forward. She removed her serving tray, straightened her back, and, for the first time in 2 decades, looked Genevieve Langston directly in the eye. No bowed head, no apology, just a calm, steady gaze. "Mrs. Langston," she said, voice clear and unwavering, "my son is not from the slums. We come from a working-class community, and he's not being arrogant. He's being honest about what he can do, something you clearly aren't used to doing for yourself." The air in the room changed instantly. A few guests shifted uncomfortably. 1 or 2 stared at the floor, realizing they were witnessing something far greater than a chess match. A social reckoning was unfolding before their eyes. Genevieve's face darkened. "How dare you speak to me like that? Have you forgotten your place in this house?" "No," Rosa replied, gently removing her apron. "I remembered my worth." Mr. Pendleton stepped in then, his voice heavy with discomfort. "Genevieve, maybe it's time we simply acknowledge the obvious. The boy is talented, incredibly so." But Genevieve laughed, a bitter, sharp sound that cracked the tension. "Can't you all see?" she snapped. "This was orchestrated. Someone trained him to embarrass me. This was never about chess. It was about making me look like a fool." At last, Malik stood up. And when he spoke, the weight in his voice silenced every adult in the room. "Mrs. Langston, do you want to know the truth?" He looked around slowly, meeting each guest's eyes, one by one. "I wasn't trained to humiliate anyone. I've spent the last 8 years studying chess because I love the game, because I wanted to prove that talent doesn't come from wealth, or last names, or private schools." His gaze returned to her. "When you invited me to show you how we play in the projects, I thought maybe, finally, someone would take me seriously, that this was my chance to prove I belonged. But now I see you didn't want a fair match. You wanted to put on a show where I was the punchline." Congresswoman Rivera had stopped recording. Now she simply watched, captivated. "How old are you?" she asked gently. 17, Malik replied. "And how long have you been playing seriously?" 8 years. She slowly turned to Genevieve, her expression a blend of disbelief and something close to contempt. "You just got outplayed," she said, "by a teenager whose mother you employ, a teenager you invited to play as a joke." The weight of every eye in the room now fell squarely on Genevieve's shoulders. But this time, there was no admiration, no envy, only judgment. I didn't know he played seriously," she mumbled. Even to her, the excuse sounded hollow. "That's not the issue," Mr. Pendleton said sharply. "The issue is you assumed he'd lose. Why? Because he's your housekeeper's son? Because he's black? Because he doesn't have a trust fund?" The silence that followed was deafening. No one moved. No one blinked. And Malik, with the same quiet focus he had shown all evening, began calmly resetting the pieces on the board. Each move crisp, precise, dignified. "Thank you for the game, Miss Langston," he said finally. "It was educational." Then he turned to his mother. "Mom," he said gently, "can we go? I have school in the morning." Rosa nodded, untying her apron and folding it over her arm. But just as they were about to leave, Rosa turned back one last time. Her voice was steady, clear. "Ms. Langston, thank you for showing me that my son belongs in places far greater than this." And with that, mother and son walked side by side toward the grand entrance of the penthouse. But just before they reached the door, Congresswoman Rivera stepped forward and called out, "Malik, are you open to scholarship opportunities?" He paused, turning his head slightly. "I know several universities," she continued. that would be thrilled to support someone with your level of talent. Malik smiled, his first real smile of the entire evening. It wasn't the smile of a showman, it was the smile of a young man who had just broken through a wall he'd been pushing against for years. "Very interested, ma'am." Rivera stepped forward and handed him her card. "Call me Monday morning." Genevieve didn't say a word. She stood frozen in place, her hands by her sides, her mind still trying to comprehend how, in the span of less than an hour, she had gone from commanding hostess to the woman who had unwittingly exposed her own prejudice, before some of the most influential people in the city. As the heavy front door closed behind Malik and Rosa, an awkward silence fell like a curtain over the room. No one raised a glass. No one congratulated the hostess. One by one, the guests began to leave. Mr. Pendleton was the first to speak. "I should get going as well." No polite goodbyes, no reassurances, just cold nods and glances of quiet disapproval. Genevieve was left standing alone in the middle of her glittering penthouse, staring at the board. The same board on which her arrogance had been methodically, mercilessly dismantled by a teenager she never considered worthy of real respect. But what she still didn't realize, not yet, was that this night wasn't the end. It was only the opening move, because from that moment forward, Malik Thompson wasn't just a boy from a modest neighborhood. He had become a symbol, a living question mark hanging over every assumption people like Genevieve Langston had long taken for granted. That night, as Malik and Rosa walked home under the quiet, starlit sky of New York's Upper West Side, he slipped Rivera's card into his pocket like a precious token. But in his mind, he wasn't just thinking about chess anymore. He was thinking bigger. The board had changed, and he was already calculating the next moves in a game much larger than 64 squares. A game where the real victory was proving that character, not capital, defines a person's worth. 6 months later, Malik Thompson walked the tree-lined paths of Columbia University as a first-year student in engineering, on a full scholarship. True to her word, Congresswoman Rivera had opened doors for him, not just to an education, but to a network of mentors and professionals who saw past zip codes and into potential. The story of that unforgettable night had spread far beyond Manhattan. The video, shared by Rivera herself on her verified social channels, had gone viral. Over 3.4 million views in just 2 weeks. Not because someone filmed the match, but because Rivera's post painted the full picture of injustice, genius, and grace under fire. It resonated across social classes, cultures, and generations. Young prodigy dismantles prejudiced socialite in viral chess showdown. That was the headline splashed across blogs, news outlets, and TikTok clips. The comments poured in by the thousands. "That boy deserves the world. What a humiliation for her." He didn't need to talk. His moves spoke louder than any insult. Genevieve Langston, once a fixture in the elite circles of Manhattan, became a social cautionary tale. Her country club revoked her membership after pressure from other members. 3 philanthropic boards quietly removed her name from their guest lists. Even longtime friends like Pendleton and his wife stopped returning her calls. At a dinner in Tribeca, Mrs. Pendleton whispered across the table, "Genevieve was always entitled, but I never imagined she'd be so cruel to humiliate a kid in front of everyone." But what cut Genevieve the deepest wasn't what others thought of her. It was realizing that Malik had never tried to ruin her. He hadn't sought revenge. He hadn't made a scene. He had simply played the game, with quiet mastery, with earned brilliance, and with a grace that highlighted her own lack of it. Meanwhile, Rosa had been promoted to head of hospitality at a luxury hotel in Midtown, with a salary 3 times what she used to make, plus full benefits. Not charity, recognition. Finally, someone saw her work for what it truly was: meticulous, disciplined, dependable. And Malik. He launched a free online chess initiative that connected underprivileged youth with college-level mentors. In just 6 months, over 200 kids had signed up, not just to learn chess, but to learn strategy, confidence, and resilience. They weren't just studying how to play. They were learning how to think. In chess, like in life, every person has unique strategic value, Malik Thompson shared in an exclusive interview with CNN. Sitting confidently in a crisp navy shirt, he spoke not as a teenager overwhelmed by sudden fame, but as someone who had quietly prepared for moments like this all his life. "And what did Ms. Genevieve Langston teach you?" the interviewer asked, curiosity piqued. Malik's expression didn't change. That same quiet composure he wore during the night that changed everything was still there. "She taught me," he said after a pause, "that some people have to lose everything before they understand what really matters." The anchor went silent for a second, clearly moved. When asked whether he harbored resentment toward the woman who had tried to humiliate him in front of her powerful guests, Malik let out a soft chuckle. "Grudges?" he said, shaking his head. "They're like unnecessary pieces in a chess game. If you hold on to them, they only block your ability to move forward. I'd rather focus on what I can build." Across the city, in a now unusually quiet penthouse overlooking Central Park, Genevieve Langston watched that interview alone. Her living room, once a place of social gatherings and endless laughter, now echoed with silence. The chandelier above her dining table glittered with no audience to impress. For the first time, she truly grasped what she had lost that night. Not a chess match, not merely social standing, but the opportunity to grow into someone better, someone braver, someone humble enough to listen. The only person who had called her after that night was Pendleton, and his words had been sharp. "Genevieve," he had said plainly over the phone, "you created that situation. And Malik?" He responded with a dignity you should have shown from the start. The words lingered long after the call ended. But the ripple effect of that night didn't stop in that penthouse, or even in Manhattan. It traveled. It echoed in classrooms, newsrooms, and living rooms around the country. Malik had done more than win a chess match. He had proven, undeniably, that true nobility does not come stamped on an invitation, or whispered in country club corridors. It is forged in struggle and revealed through action. He had turned prejudice into purpose. He had taken humiliation and turned it into fuel for growth. And now, when Malik looks toward the future, he doesn't see doors closed by other people's assumptions. He sees a map of opportunity drawn by his own resilience. Genevieve had tried to reduce him, to use him as entertainment to inflate her fragile ego, but in doing so, she had accidentally spotlighted her own insecurity. Because in the end, and it was clear, true greatness is not found in tearing others down. It's revealed in your ability to lift others up. At home, Rosa had framed a photo of Malik receiving his first academic honor at Columbia University. Right beside it hung a certificate from the National Chess Initiative Malik founded, now impacting thousands of underserved youth across the country. These achievements, no inheritance could buy them, and no prejudice could erase them. Malik had discovered something powerful, that the best kind of victory isn't in destroying your critics. It's in building something so extraordinary, so inspiring, that their doubt becomes irrelevant. Genevieve Langston had tried to turn him into a party trick. Malik Thompson became a role model. And that difference? That's what determines not only who wins on a chessboard, but who wins at life. If this story moved you, if you believe that dignity, resilience, and character can outshine status and prejudice, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because the real power in life doesn't come from privilege. It comes from the courage to turn obstacles into the very fuel for greatness.